New York. The City of Lights held its charms. As an investigative journalist, it had been my home, my hunting ground, and my muse for the better part of 2 decades. But it was time for a change of scene. A cryptid story had caught my eye, a lurid tale of a creature known as the Mothman, haunting the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Drawn by curiosity and the promise of an eerie narrative, I decided to go where the story led. "Callahan, you're chasing shadows," my editor Jeff Baxter grumbled over a late-night conference call. His gravelly voice, usually commanding, now resonated with fatigue. "I've chased shadows before, Baxter. Sometimes they lead to the darkest truths," I replied, half smiling to myself. Jeff was a pragmatic man, but he understood the allure of the elusive. A few days later, I was on a plane to the Mountain State, leaving behind the clamor of New York for the rustic serenity of the Appalachians. The contrast was as stark as it was disorienting. Point Pleasant was a postcard of rural America. Its lush hills rolled like waves, the river sparkled under the midsummer sun, and its houses, modest, color-splashed structures, were like splatters of paint on a verdant canvas. Yet, beneath this idyllic veneer, I sensed an undercurrent of fear, a dread that lurked in the silence, in the wide-eyed stares of its inhabitants. It wasn't long before I met my first interviewee, Ellen Murphy. A retired schoolteacher, she claimed to have seen the Mothman, or as she called it, the red-eyed devil. Her house was a charming, blue-painted cottage, filled with the smell of baked bread and old books. Over a cup of coffee, she shared her encounter with the creature, an account delivered with startling conviction. It was taller than a man, Callahan, and shrouded in darkness, and its eyes, they glowed crimson, like fire against the night. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was something else entirely. Her trembling hands and the urgency in her voice painted a haunting picture. Whether it was the influence of the sleepy town, the shadows playing tricks on my skeptical city-bred mind, or the earnestness of her story, I couldn't dismiss Ellen's words. That evening, I took a stroll along the deserted banks of the Ohio River, contemplating Ellen's tale. The sun had sunk behind the hills, leaving a blanket of stars shimmering above. My New Yorker instincts recoiled at the silence, but I forced myself to walk, to listen, to inhale the quiet. As I strolled, I noticed something unusual, a local legend graffitied on the town's ancient bridge. An illustration of a monstrous creature with glowing red eyes stared back at me from the cold, gray steel. The Mothman. A shiver, unbidden and cold, slid down my back. That night I lay in my motel room, gazing out the window at the quiet town. The silence was punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant hum of a car engine. As sleep slowly took me, I found my thoughts meandering back to Ellen, her eyes wide with fear, the creature on the bridge, and the eerie stillness of Point Pleasant. I'd come looking for a story, a curiosity. Instead, I'd stumbled upon a town living in silent terror. The shadows I'd come chasing were starting to darken, to reach out. But the truth was still out there, lurking. The next morning, I decided to explore further, to immerse myself deeper in the mystery. Following the faint whispers of town rumors, I found my way to the TNT area, an abandoned World War II munitions site, and, as the townsfolk said, the Mothman's favorite haunt. The area was a sprawling wilderness of dilapidated structures, overgrown with years of unchecked vegetation. A chill hung in the air, belying the summer heat. As I tread carefully through the undergrowth, an odd, unsettling feeling crept up, a sense of being watched. I shrugged it off as the eerie ambiance of the place playing tricks on my mind, yet the feeling persisted. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" The voice came from behind me. I turned to find a man in his late 50s, tall, with weathered features and a gaze as hard as flint. He introduced himself as Dale Patterson, a former ranger. Dale had an interesting perspective, having grown up hearing tales of the Mothman, only to find them woven into the fabric of his adult life. I asked him about the creature, expecting a tale similar to Ellen's, but his account was different. "Callahan, the Mothman ain't a devil," he said, his voice thick with the local accent. "It's a harbinger. It shows up when something terrible is about to happen. Some folks even say it's a warning. I was intrigued. A harbinger. A warning. The plot was thickening, the shadows becoming more convoluted. I pressed him for more, and he shared stories, old and new. Stories of tragedies, accidents, disasters that had inexplicably been preceded by Mothman sightings. Leaving the TNT area, I couldn't shake off Dale's words or the unsettling feeling of being watched. The Mothman was more than a creature, it seemed. It was a myth, a mystery, a symbol that fed on fear and foreboding. Back in town, I spent the rest of the day conducting interviews. Each account was unique, yet they all contained a similar thread: fear, curiosity, and a deep-rooted belief in the creature's existence. Yet, for all their faith, none could provide definitive proof, just anecdotes, experiences, and rumors passed down generations. Later that night, I found myself back at the graffiti-marked bridge. The depiction of the Mothman seemed to glow ominously in the dim light. Dale's words echoed in my mind. It shows up when something terrible is about to happen. Suddenly, Point Pleasant felt smaller, its silence heavy with dread. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was on the precipice of something major, something dark. As the stars blinked down at me, my New Yorker skepticism wrestled with my growing unease. Was I falling into a town-wide delusion? Or was I finally listening to the right kind of whispers? I knew one thing for sure. The shadows I was chasing were darker and deeper than any I'd encountered before. With a deep breath, I walked back into town, back to the creeping dread and hushed whispers of Point Pleasant. Something told me I was on the brink of a revelation. Little did I know how crazy it would turn out to be. As time passed, my search for answers intensified. Every interview, every conversation, every clue only served to deepen the enigma, to darken the shadows. The notion of the Mothman as a harbinger was an undercurrent in every account, a sinister refrain that echoed through the town's silent streets. I felt an impending sense of doom creeping in, wrapping its icy tendrils around Point Pleasant. One evening, a chance encounter took me down another twisted path. I met Laura Bennett, a local journalist who had been researching the Mothman for years. "Callahan, I heard you're digging up old ghosts," she said, her green eyes reflecting the curiosity that we both shared. We were two outsiders, two skeptics navigating through a landscape of believers. Laura showed me her research, a dizzying collection of interviews, articles, and photographs, a mosaic of fear, fascination, and obsession. Amidst the labyrinth of information, something caught my eye: a series of images from the night of the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967. One photograph was different, a smudge, a figure silhouetted against the night sky, its red eyes blazing like dying stars. It was blurred, distorted, but the implication was clear: the Mothman. My heart raced as I recalled Dale's words. It shows up when something terrible is about to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Laura's research, the photograph, Dale's words, they all swirled in my mind, forming a sinister tableau. The shadows I had come to chase were morphing, shifting, and the fear was palpable. In the following days, I kept coming back to the photograph, to the nebulous figure and its haunting glow. I found myself wandering through Point Pleasant, past the serene houses, along the hushed streets, towards the old graffiti-marked bridge. I thought of New York, of my editor Baxter, of the life I had left behind. I thought of Ellen, Dale, Laura, their stories, their fears, their fascination. The Mothman wasn't just a creature or a cryptid. It was a symbol of dread, a prophetic entity woven into the town's history and consciousness. But for all the rumors, for all the fear and mystery, the creature remained elusive. The truth, the answers I was seeking seemed always just out of reach, hidden in the town's collective dread. It was late in the night, on one of my sleepless walks, that I first heard it. A soft, fluttering sound, like wings against the still air. It was coming from the direction of the TNT area, the heart of the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I recalled Ellen's and Dale's accounts. With a deep breath, I decided to follow the sound, to step deeper into the shadows. I was an investigative journalist after all. And somewhere in the dark, the truth was waiting. I ventured towards the TNT area, my flashlight cutting through the suffocating darkness. The ominous sound of fluttering wings grew louder, echoing through the night, every beat resounding within my chest. My breaths came in quick gasps, the cool night air stinging my lungs. Through the trees, the dilapidated buildings of the munitions site emerged. The air was colder here, laden with an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the soft flutters. I couldn't shake off the sense of being watched, of being hunted. I walked further into the site, my heart pounding like a drum against the quiet. And then, just as I was about to turn back, feeling foolish and spooked, I saw it. There, amidst the ruins of the old munitions site, perched on one of the crumbling structures, was a figure. Its form was obscured by shadows, but two things were vivid: the glowing red eyes, hauntingly familiar from the graffiti-marked bridge, and the dark figure in the photograph. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape the unsettling tableau. But I stood there, frozen, as I looked into those crimson eyes, the dread of an entire town reflected in their glow. It was as if time stood still, the world narrowing down to that one haunting, unforgettable sight. Then, in an explosion of noise, the creature took flight, its massive wings sending a gust of cold wind through the clearing. I watched, a silent spectator, as it disappeared into the night, leaving behind a sense of foreboding that hung heavily in the air. When I finally made my way back to town, dawn was breaking. I was no longer the outsider, the skeptic. I had seen the Mothman. I had looked into the dread-filled eyes of the town's terror, the harbinger of disaster. In the coming days, I shared my encounter with Ellen, Dale, and Laura. Their reactions were a mix of horror and vindication, a complex web of fear, fascination, and reluctant acceptance. It was as if my sighting had validated their stories, their beliefs, their fears. My New Yorker instincts had wanted to dismiss it all as a rural legend, a collective delusion. But I couldn't. I had seen the Mothman. I had felt its haunting presence. I had walked through the shadows and come out the other side, forever marked by the experience. As I left Point Pleasant, heading back to New York, I carried with me the stories, the encounters, the horrifying image of the Mothman. But more than that, I carried the haunting realization of the power of collective fear, of how deeply a legend could be woven into the fabric of a community. Back in the bustling city, under the bright lights, life moved at its unrelenting pace. But in the quiet corners of my mind, in the depth of the night, I remembered the Mothman. I remembered the silence of Point Pleasant, broken only by the fluttering wings of a creature that thrived in the shadows, in the dread, in the whispered tales of a small town.